Hey, what's going on, everybody? This video has been kind of a long time coming. This is my DIY video modular. This is something that I built last year in 2020 between September and December. I think I've been kind of putting this video off, partly due to being wrapped up in other projects, but also just because this is primarily a personal project and it can be kind of hard to work up the motivation to spend tons of time producing a video for something I made for myself. So I think what I'll do is just keep this video kind of loose and try not to stress too much about making this a huge production and then inevitably spend tons of time making it into one anyway. So last year, after making my first few video things, I realized I kind of needed something more fully formed for myself for a few reasons, for prototyping and whatnot, but also just because it's pretty easy to burn out making things for other people if you never make things for yourself. I'd learned that in the past when kind of over leveraging myself with commissions, so I said, you know what, I need to build something in the video space for myself. So that's kind of what got me started on this thing, and also as I kept learning more and more, this thing kept growing in scope from what was initially just a standard little self-contained box, but after a while I realized it just made the most sense to go the modular route. So I think what I'll do is give a quick rundown on what these modules are, what they do, and then I'll just start building a patch, and we can kind of go through that process. So I do have a web page for this that I made a while back that just has photos of each module as well as some information about each of them and what they do. But it's been long overdue that I make a video actually demoing this thing. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. Let me just yank all of these patch cables. Alright, so I'm going to just quickly run through what each of these modules is, and then we'll get into using it a little bit. This is a feedback generator, this is a glitcher, this is a weird combo module because I had a low-pass filter that I made a while ago, and I also needed a VGA, or a composite to VGA, so I just kind of squashed those together into this module. This is an audio amplifier, this is a dual LFO, these are two signal generators. This is a dual LCD screen, dirty mixer, source select. We have two different mults and a patch saver performance controller, whatever you want to call it, just sending patch points to switches and whatnot, as well as patch points to go between RCA jacks and standard 3.5mm jacks. Cool. So this and this are kind of like the brains of the thing. This generates feedback on its own, as well as having just a slew of I/O. And between these two, you can create another feedback loop, or you can use this just to glitch out VGA signals. And then with these, as well as this, then we can start sending simple signals to these primary modules, as well as creating shapes and whatnot. So let's start making a basic patch. I'm going to send VGA out of here into here just so we have max control over our final output. I'm going to send the output of this into one of our monitors. And because the image looks a little bit different coming out as composite or VGA, I'm actually going to send composite out of here to one monitor and the VGA to composite to this monitor, just so we can see the difference in the signal chain. And then I'm going to take, these both have pass-throughs, both these monitors. So let's come out of here and go into the source 1. And then out of this monitor's pass-through, I will send that to the capture card. So now I can easily select between coming out of the fully processed signal, where we can kind of do some color correction without impeding what our feedback is doing. So this is the original feedback source, and this is the one coming out over here. Cool. So then this module is kind of like the standalone things you'll see on this channel. It's a little feedback generator with controls for red, green, and blue, as well as image direction. We have CV control over direction and color, as well as this freeze function. And we have a way to send audio out, as well as signals in directly to those color channels. So let's start with just a nice slow shifting feedback look. There we go. So what do we want to do next? We could add some glitches, like posterizing effects with this glitchy patch bay over here. This is kind of like an expansion or just a module version of the VGS35, which is one of the first video things that I made. It's basically just an old VGA to composite converter with a bunch of patch points on the RAM. So in like 2014, I had found one at a Goodwill, and I picked it up, and then I found it again in 2019 and was like, I'm not doing anything with this. I wonder if there's anything interesting in it. And there is, so I just, exposed a bunch of patch points. So let's find a spot that we like, or a connection that we like. This is nice. It's like an old thresholded posterizing type effect. So I don't want that on all the time. So let's take those 2 points, send it one here and one here. And now what this is doing is just sending it to a switch, so we can easily turn that off and on. We also have buttons and knobs that we can send things to. So, cool. It's our first little thing that we can easily change around. So now let's do something with this dual LFO or oscillator. So we can come out as a square wave or a triangle wave, and we can also select the range of speeds. This bottom one is meant to go a bit slower, this one a bit faster. And each one has rate, shape, and depth. So let's come out of the bottom one for slow. Let's go into CV for, let's do the blue channel. Cool. So now we have a square wave pulsing that blue channel on and off. Now let's take this top one and send it to the red channel. And then in these high ranges of speeds, it's easy to create scan lines in a certain color. That's already kind of a cool look. Cool. So now we have a fairly dynamic little feedback type patch going on with some scan lines. Next, let's get these signal generators involved. So these are just rehoused signal generators. These can be had fairly cheap. I think they come in a 2, 5, and 8 megahertz max variant, and I want to say I got these for like 30 bucks a pop. You can find them made by different manufacturers online. But they all do the same thing. So I have an offset, amplitude, and a rotary encoder. Now the great thing about these is that you can dial in an exact frequency. So if I were to send this signal to the green channel, here's 10 hertz, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. So right at 60 we have a stable scan line. We can go up to 120 for a stable 2 scan lines, etc., etc. So that's fantastic. But what else is really great is that, unlike this oscillator over here, we can go into crazy high ranges at stable speeds, so we can get diagonal lines and then really dial in exact frequencies. So let's make some fine adjustments here. So now we have this going to our green channel. Let me change that wave to a sine wave. So now this is a sine wave at a little over 145 kilohertz. You can change the offset to bring it in and out. Change the amplitude to a lower amount. We're getting some little ovals here. And then as we change the frequency, we can get those to move around on screen. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Let me go a little lower here. So we can go down, we can go up. This does have CV that I've added for offset amplitude, as well as hitting the OK button, because you know, you can trigger changing the wave shape really easily with something like the LFO. In fact, let's do that right now. Let's come out of the blue channel and instead send that to the OK button. So now this LFO is changing the wave shape. How about, actually, instead of always doing that, let's first send it to a mult in case we want to use it for something else, and then let's send it to a switch, and then let's send that switch out to the OK button. So now we can easily turn it on and off. And we also still have access to that through our mult. So cool. Let's leave this as a square wave for now so I can demo what we can do with this other one. So let's actually, once again, instead, let's come out of this output and go to one end of this potentiometer over here. And then let's take the other signal generator, come into the other side of the potentiometer, and then let's come out of the potentiometer and back into the green channel. So now what we're doing is we're mixing this signal generator with this one, and we can fade between the two, or we can combine them. So right now this one is at 0 Hertz. Let's drop in patch cables all over the place. Let's move this up to a similar range, in the kilohertz range. And what we can do is get them to overlap. And where those two signals overlap, our color will show through. So now we can start making some interesting shapes. So right now this is on a square wave. Let's go to a sine wave. So now we've got some floating circles. If we go to a triangle, then we're now making triangles with our two triangle waves that are overlapping. We can fade between this left signal generator and the right. And what if we want to change that triangle? Well, on these signal generators, we can change the duty cycle. So this is both of them right at 50%. So we can get a diamond, or kind of a square. There we go. So if I change the duty cycle above or below 50%, then we can change where that overlap is happening on our two crisscrossing diagonal lines. So let's set this one to 51%, and we'll kind of jump to the right side of that overlap. Let's change this one to 51%. Now they're both overlapping on the right side, and we can kind of, move around to either the left or the right or the bottom. So let's make it up on the top for now for these little pyramids. So while cutting the video together, I realized I could probably do a little bit better explaining how these shapes are being made. So what I want to do is very quickly recreate it here in Touchdesigner and show you kind of what's going on here. So let's pretend that this is signal generator A. We're sending out a triangle wave with a duty cycle of 50%. That just means in this case that it's a standard triangle wave. So if we think about each of these being a single wave, we're going from off to on in the center, back to off. So off, on, off, on, off, on. So it's our standard triangle wave. If we were to change the duty cycle above 50%, then we'd get more of a ramp, which would look like this. So each of these is, instead of hitting on in the very center and fading back out, each wave is going from off to on and then repeating. It's the same thing for going below 50% duty cycle. Then we're getting more of a sawtooth. So our gradient is starting at on and going to off and then repeating. And it's the same deal with signal generator B, but we just have that one at a frequency that's going in the opposite direction. So then if we were to take A and then B and overlap them, then we get these diamonds. So then if we were to change the duty cycle of one of them, then you can see that where those gradients are overlapping, or just creating different shapes. And if we were to do something like just use a square wave instead, then it would be even more apparent what exactly is happening. So instead of a gradient here, we're just going from off to on, and that's 1, off to on, off to on. Same here. And then when they overlap, we get a perfect little diamond. So I hope that better explains a little bit how exactly these shapes are being formed. And now, because it's not doing a whole lot, let's turn our red color back up here. Let's come out of our top oscillator and let's go into the, what's this one? Let's go into the offset for the signal generator. So let's control the offset of the diagonal line going this way with the oscillator from this LFO, or this oscillator rather. So now the overlap over here is showing through. We can do a little color mixing. If we don't like having any other colors, we can have just red, just green, just blue. Very cool. Now let's take that bottom LFO, the slow one that we're not using right now. Let's turn that switch back on so we can cycle through different shapes. So now let's change what this bottom LFO is doing. Don't want this on all the time, so again I'll send this through a little manual gate. Just send it to a switch. Let's send it to the freeze function. And but we can choose to do the freeze function over here or over here. So again, this is like our final output, and this is before some of this signal path is happening. So if we do it over here, we're still going to get some of those scan lines. I actually want to do this on the final freeze. So let's do that over here. Send it to this patch point. Now I'm going to move this up to a higher range of speeds. So this is freezing with that LFO. Let's make it a little faster. Strobe on an old video mixer. And in a high range of speeds, once you reach scanline rates, what this does is it becomes a slit scan. You can dial in the exact spot. It's a little finicky. Right there. So right now, this wave shape is a square. So we have one section that is frozen, and as it scans, one section is frozen and one is unfrozen. Now this middle knob here will let us change that pulse width so we can have most of the image frozen and a small sliver of pixels that reset as it scans. Or in the very right, we can do the opposite, where most everything is moving and then only a small sliver is frozen. Very cool. Let's take the red out. Now let's try changing our frequency over here, see what else we can find. let's come out of the TTL on here. Send that to a switch. Send that switch to blue channel, so we can easily add these. Cool, so now let's get audio involved. I'm going to use this filter, this low pass filter, as my output. So then if I turn up the resonance and play around with cutoff, I can play around with it. Just got that going to a little reverb. So let's come out of one of these color channels. Believe it or not, this is as easy as pins 1, 2, and 3 on a VGA signal. You can send to, you know, anything that you can send audio to, and you can get an audible representation of I'm getting lost in this forest of patch cables. You can send that signal, you know, to something like your DAW, amplify it, and get a representation of the color on screen at a 60 hertz wave. So let's actually come out on our final red over here. These pots are getting a little scratchy. But actually, if we get this into an oscillator rate, then now we're sending that to our DAW as well. So what's a way we can make this audio a little more interesting and, you know, correspond to something on screen? Well, remember we have this LFO. We have the square going to a switch, so let's turn the switch on, and then we're sending that to this signal generator, which is changing the wave shape every time this pulses. Now if we change the shape so it's a bit more of a sawtooth, and we can send that sawtooth to the CV for the cutoff. So now every time the shape changes, we're pulling up the cutoff on our filter. And then we can do something like take this upper oscillator, send that into the blue channel as well. Get some harmonics. We can also move that feedback around, so let's make it drip rather than move upward. Out as a square wave, I'm willing to bet it's going to be a bit louder. So then remember, this 60 hertz wave that we're getting is representative of the blue channel. So we can do things to that blue channel. And rather than sending this oscillator directly into our blue channel here, let's send it to CV for the blue channel. We can get kind of a phasing. frequency of this oscillator. We'll also change both what the blue channel is doing and what we're hearing. And at steady scan lines, it will be perfectly in tune. Or we could just pulse it. Let's change a few more parameters with that same pulse wave. So let's try that on the offset for the signal generator. So we can change that shape a little bit more. And then let's do that same thing with the amplitude of this one. Hopefully we can get a little bit more motion. Then let's just try shifting some of these patch cables to different colors and see what we get. Alright, so this is the point where I'm kind of losing track on what all this spaghetti is doing, and I take a minute and just kind of go nuts and see what happens. So I think I'll wrap this video up here because it just kind of devolved into me fooling around. Thanks for checking this out. I might make some more videos on this thing in the future, especially if I end up filling that last 32 HP of empty space on here. I have a few ideas, but I haven't decided on that yet. Part of that just depends on whether or not venues open back up and I'm able to get back to VJing again. I'd love to be able to tote this thing around a bit. But yeah, this was a pretty basic rundown, just making a simple patch with some shapes, but there's still a ton that this thing is capable of that I didn't get into. As a modular, it's definitely more focused on knob twiddling and really dialing in a look and then kind of tweaking it rather than building anything completely generative, since we're mostly just working with simple signals here. I didn't build any logic into this thing. And maybe one day I'll go back and put these in some better looking panels instead of these that are just covered in Sharpie. But I've been really happy with how it came out. It's been ideal for experimenting and learning new stuff, as well as prototyping features for the standalone builds. And speaking of those, I've had new commission requests on pause for a bit while working on some big revisions, so if you're on the waiting list, you should have gotten a progress update on everything a few days ago, and I ought to be wrapping things up and moving ahead with commissions again here soon. And alongside that, I'm close to wrapping up development on the Sync-Eater, an analog video glitch device that I'll be releasing for sale, so be on the lookout for that. I also wanted to mention that I've been considering starting a Patreon. I've gone back and forth on the idea for a while, but thought I'd put it out there. If you're aware of the types of things that I do and you're at all inclined, I've put up a poll over at patreon.com/Gleix to try and get a feel for what people might be into seeing if I were to start one up. If you think you might be interested in supporting these projects directly in return for exclusive content, resources, and early access to the projects that I release, I'd love to know. So again, I do have a page with info on the modules and whatnot. I'll put some links in the description. You can find me and my stuff over at gleix.net. I'm also at Gleix on Instagram, and feel free to reach out. My inbox is always open. Thanks for checking this out, and I will catch you here with the next one. Take care, everyone.